Journey Beyond Sodor is a disappointing and, if I'm being honest, kind of confused movie. Now, I by no means think that Journey Beyond Sodor is a bad movie. To say that would be pretty dumb, I feel, as this movie has a lot going for it, a lot more than the previous special, The Great Race, and it is leagues ahead of movies like Misty Island Rescue and Day of the Diesels. However, I think I speak for at least a few fans when I say that Journey Beyond Sodor left a bit to be desired. And for all of the wonderful things it does, it falters in many ways. Some rather minuscule and nitpicky, and some a little harder to ignore. So, without further ado, let's talk about Journey Beyond Sodor and what makes it a good, albeit disappointing, Thomas and Friends film. Journey Beyond Sodor, of course, released in 2017 at the tail end of the Brenner era of Thomas and Friends, and let me tell you, when this movie was announced and little snippets of plot details were surfacing online, I was hyped. The movie was seemingly stepping in a new yet familiar direction, one more in line with the 2015 Thomas and Friends special, Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, which had a much more mature and darker tone compared to other specials. The early plot synopsis of Journey Beyond Sodor usually read something along the lines of Thomas sets off to the mainland to save James and bring him home. That synopsis, while brief, suggested that this might be a bit of a different Thomas movie. Questions like, what happened to James? What's on the mainland? How are the new experimental engines involved? Were swirling around my head, as it was in many other Thomas fans at the time. And when the trailer dropped in May of 2017, the realization slowly started to set in that this movie was maybe not going to be the epic adventure it was promising, at least not entirely. So what actually is the plot of Journey Beyond Sodor then? Well, the whole thing centers around Thomas and James arguing about who is Sir Topham Hatt's favorite engine, as well as who does the most important work and who gets to have adventures, and Thomas apparently not feeling like a number one again. It's all a little muddled, and I'll talk about it in a bit, but all you need to know right now is that Thomas and James are mad at each other and fighting, essentially. This boils over once Henry has an accident while taking a goods train to Bridlington on the mainland, and James is tasked with taking said train instead. Thomas, however, takes the train in order to spite James and heads off to the mainland for a grand adventure. Along the way, he encounters a crane called Beresford, who is a complete pain in the ass, 3 experimental engines named Lexi, Theo, and Merlin, and he comes across a steelworks where 2 sinister engines, Frankie and Hurricane, work. Frankie and Hurricane seem nice at first, but they soon turn out to be master manipulators and schemers who trap Thomas at the steelworks, deliver his cars to Bridlington Goods Yard for him, and then force him to work for them at the foundry, primarily hauling heavy slag cars. Thomas does manage to escape in a pretty exciting chase sequence, but while heading back to Sodor, he discovers that James has come to the mainland in search of him, and that James has now been captured by Frankie and Hurricane. Thus, Thomas must team up with the experimental engines to take down Frankie and Hurricane, save James, and get back to Sodor. And yeah, that's basically it in terms of the plot. If you've been paying attention, you might have begun to notice where my issues start with this movie. And that's the fact that it does not execute its core idea well. Remember when I said that the initial description of this movie was an epic adventure where Thomas has to save James? Yeah, well, we only get that in like the last third of the movie. James spends most of the movie as a side character and only becomes relevant to Thomas's adventure towards the 2/3 point of the movie. Now, yes, I will concede that the movie does provide some pretty great adventure stuff prior to the climax with James. For example, the action with Thomas's initial escape from the steelworks is pretty intense. And the camera work in that scene, as well as any scene where the movie is trying to allude to the fact that Frankie and Hurricane aren't who they say they are, is really good. It's very cinematic and adds to the epicness, so to speak. But in terms of this movie being on the same par as something like Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, like it was advertised, yeah, this ain't it. Half the movie is dedicated to Thomas's shenanigans at the canal, or getting lost, or at the steelworks, or at the experimental engines yard, and the tension just isn't felt. I feel like if this movie's story was framed more so as some kind of quest, it could have been better. Maybe have the movie start out the same way with Thomas and James arguing, but maybe have Thomas say something really hurtful and James takes the train to the mainland to spite Thomas, but then James gets captured at the steelworks, so Thomas has to go on the epic journey to save him. And the whole movie can build on the drama between Thomas and James, as well as the tension of the epic prison break story. I also think that the movie had a pretty major problem in terms of its character motivations and how some characters are related to those motivations and overall story themes. As I said earlier, the whole reason Thomas and James fight is because they begin arguing over who is the favorite. Except it's never really made clear what that actually means. Sometimes the movie says it means literally being the Fat Controller's favorite. Sometimes it feels a little more ambiguous, like James just means he's the most important engine on the railway or something. But then as well, James starts bragging about how he's the favorite because he gets the best jobs and adventures, which makes me think he means who's the most important, but then Thomas takes James's train to spite him, and that just leaves me thinking, how does taking another engine's train prove that Thomas is either the Fat Controller's favorite, or that he is the most important engine on the railway? And what makes it even funnier is the fact that Sir Topham Hatt just doesn't seem to care when he finds out that Thomas did what he did, and just sends James to work on Thomas's branch line. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I remember Sir Topham Hatt being a little more authoritative than this roughly 2 years prior. But either way, the conflict of who is the favorite is very muddled behind dialogue that is too vague. Like, yeah, you could argue James saying he gets all the important jobs implies Topham likes him more, but that's too vague if you ask me. This also begs the question, how exactly does a prison break story featuring experimental engines whose arc is seemingly just overcoming their fears of not being able to do anything, tie into a story and the associated themes of two characters fighting over who is the favorite? Like, there is a small connection in terms of how Frankie and Hurricane manipulate Thomas by calling him their favorite, but that's about it, and as far as I can tell, there's no real connection at all between that theme and the experimental engines. So for as fun as they are, they feel a little useless in the story thematically speaking. There's also a line in the Hottest Place in Town musical number where Frankie says, "where you can feel like a number one." So I guess they were trying to connect Frankie and Hurricane to a theme similar to that of Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, where Thomas no longer feels like he's the number one. And maybe I'm just nitpicking at this point, but in terms of character motivations and themes, this movie just feels a little broken to me. And that's basically my problem with it. It promises an epic adventure, but has muddled themes and a story execution that causes it to fall very short. I also think part of what makes this movie a little disappointing as well is the fact that this is like the 6th or 7th time by now that the show has tried to pull the whole Thomas's biggest adventure ever shtick, and don't get me wrong, sometimes that actually does work, like in Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, for example. But the difference is, with that movie, Thomas actually did have his biggest adventure yet, and this movie, as I have already outlined, isn't that. Like, I totally understand that writing for this show can be a bit difficult. There are only so many things you can do with anthropomorphic trains, and the fact that we got as many movies as we did is really a testament to the writing team. But you can only do the Thomas Goes Missing storyline so many times before it just becomes repetitive. Hell, for the last 3 feature-length Thomas films, Thomas's plot is centered around leaving Sodor. And if that doesn't scream we run out of ideas, I don't know what does. And it screams it even further when those films aren't very good. I think building on the mainland adventure set up from The Great Race was a good step, but honestly, it just did not deliver. There are, of course, a lot of issues that the Thomas community has with this movie outside of story, but I have very mixed opinions on many of those things, so on top of discussing those, I do want to point out some things that I like about this movie, as like I said, the movie is not all bad. Firstly, everyone and their mother has complained about the engines moving their bodies unnaturally, but if I'm being honest, for as stupid as it is, I feel like this movie and the franchise as a whole has bigger problems, and I think later content like Big World Big Adventures makes the stuff in this movie way more tolerable in retrospect. I think the music in this film is also pretty solid. It's no Great Race soundtrack, but there are many catchy tunes here. Hottest Place in Town has been in my playlist forever now, and Thomas's I Wanna Go Home song is probably one of the most emotional songs to come out of the whole CGI series. I do not, however, like the constant fourth wall breaking with James, Thomas, Frankie, Hurricane, and the trucks. There are so many points where a song starts or stops, and the characters acknowledge what's going on. Like this scene here.
And anyway, I was going to sing a song, not you. Well, go ahead and sing if you want to. I'm not stopping you. Quiet, everybody!
Or in the establishing shot of the Hottest Place in Town reprise, where the music is shown coming from the steelworks from a distance, implying there is actually music playing. Which is so weird. Like, are the people in on these musical numbers? To get back to a positive, though, I think the action in this movie is pretty solid, although it sometimes does go a little overboard with Beresford, for example, and some of the shenanigans at the steelworks, but honestly, this is still miles better than the Great Race Bridge Jump. The film's climax in particular, with the escape from the steelworks and the defeat of Frankie and Hurricane, is also, of course, very great. On the topic of Beresford as well, I think a lot of people get annoyed by him, and yeah, he is kind of annoying and pointless. There are other ways to delay Thomas in the initial kind of first act of the movie, and for him to find out about James being captured by Frankie and Hurricane closer to the third act, but honestly, this franchise has seen worse, and this movie has much bigger problems than Beresford, so he doesn't really bother me that much. I think at this point, too, I'm probably obligated to mention the scene where Frankie and Hurricane are redeemed, and, like, yeah, it's bad, but honestly, everyone and their mother has talked about why that is. The fact that it's just a massive cop-out in terms of villain writing, especially when 2 years before we had Sailor John, arguably the best Thomas villain of all time. So yeah, it sucks, but honestly, I don't have that much to say about it, so let's just kind of move on. I also do wish we got a little more backstory for Frankie and Hurricane, as it is implied that they have a history of trapping engines at this steelworks, which would be neat to see. It's also only really told to us that they can't manage the work on their own, so maybe a scene showing them struggling to keep up with demand could have developed their motivations a little more. I also really like the design of the steelworks. It's similar to the bits of Sudrian industry we've seen up to this point, but it's visually distinct enough to be its own thing in a way that the steelworks is almost its own character in this movie, and it's pretty cool. Now is also probably a pretty good time to talk a little more in depth about the experimental engines. I think the experimentals, for as thematically pointless as they are a lot of fun. Lexi's accent changes can come off as annoying for some people, and that's fine, but if I'm being honest, I find her and Theo's banter/awkwardness to be quite entertaining and honestly pretty funny at times. It's really a shame, in my opinion, that we never saw these guys again, minus Merlin. On the rewatch I did for this review, I also noticed a couple of funny things again. Like this bridge support that covers a track. What's that doing here? Or Thomas apparently having wheel slip while not moving under his own power. And probably my favorite, the fact that Bridlington Goods Yard is very clearly supposed to be the same place that the Great Railway Show happened at a year prior. Same set, same diesels, etc. So why does Thomas have such a hard time finding it? You literally made it in like half an hour last time, Thomas. Why are you so directionally challenged? These aren't criticism, though, just, funny observations. And that, folks, is pretty much all I have to say in regard to Journey Beyond Sodor. It is a movie that promised a really cool story, but really fumbled the execution in a lot of ways. It is, however, and I will always maintain that it is, not a bad Thomas movie. I had a lot of fun rewatching it, and I'm sure many of you will as well, so why not throw it on for your next Thomas movie night, eh? Thanks for watching, everyone. I will see you all in the next video. Let me know what Thomas movie or media you would like me to cover next. Bye, guys!